Welcome everyone, welcome South Africa, welcome everyone that I know, everyone that has been joining on the stream. Tonight what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a bread, one of my favorite breads. It's called Umbhako Xhosa pot bread. The really nice thing about this bread is it is very simple to make and very easy to make. The great thing is you can have this done from flour to a baked bread within an hour. What we will be doing tonight is I'm going to be showing you how to put it together, the ingredients that are going to be used, as well as how to make it rise and how to bake it and whatnot. Right. Ultimately, how I'm going to be doing this now is I'm going to be showing you what ingredients you will be needing, what equipment you will be needing, and then we'll actually go through and actually make the item that we need to make. Right. The first thing that you will be needing is obviously the recipe. Here is the recipe over here. You can obviously take a look onto our website. The recipe is there, plus a whole bunch of other ones. You by all means please go onto the website and have a look, and then you can obviously make these as we go along. The ingredients that you would need are, as you can see, we have some flour, we have some sugar, there you go, you have some sugar, you have some spray and cook, have yeast, this is a very important little one over here, you have some salt, some corn, and some warm water. Now that's the ingredients that you need. Now you could always add extra ones if you would really like to. You could always substitute the corn with anything else, but we'll get to that in a later stage. When it comes to the equipment that's needed, ultimately you could do all of this by hand. You technically do not need a bowl, you technically do not need a Kenwood mixer, but it is always an advantage to have. Ultimately, when it comes to the equipment that I'm going to be using tonight, I am going to be using a Kenwood mixer, I'm using a whisk, I'm going to be using a scale. You good?
I'm learning.
Going to be using a scale, and then very importantly, you're going to be using a cake tester. Now you could always do this with a metal skewer or anything like that, or even a small metal knife, but I'll show you how to use this later.
Derek says, where's your wine?
That's a good point. I need wine! Now watch. The wine is going to magically appear.
Will wine magically appear?
Yes, wine will. Alright, ultimately how we're going to put it together is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to be weighing everything. As you can see, I've already weighed everything here. Well, I'll tell you how everything gets done. First thing you're going to be doing is you're going to be weighing off your cake flour, which will be 450 grams. So this you'll take straight into the bowl. You can sieve this if you really want to, but you do not need to. Hi Ripey, how'd you go? You do not need to sieve it because the type of bread is you can really make this out in the bush when you're camping, anything like that. There you go, see, what I tell you. Magically, I have some whiskey instead of wine. There you go. So cheers everyone. Alright, so the next step is once you've got your flour in your bowl, you're going to be adding your salt. Put your salt, 1 teaspoon of salt straight in. Then you're going to be taking, out of the 3 teaspoons of sugar that you need, you're going to be putting 2 teaspoons into your flour, like that. Reserving the 1 teaspoon of sugar for the next step. Ultimately, the next step is basically blooming your yeast. Now this is a very important process, especially when it comes down to making breads, because your yeast, if you do not look after your yeast, it can die or expire, and ultimately what's going to happen is when you actually try and use it in a recipe, if it's not ready and not activated, it won't rise and the bread will come out really hard, and basically hard enough that you could probably make a frisbee out of it. Ultimately, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking your little packet of yeast, you're going to be opening it up, pour the whole little packet, which is 10 grams, into your bowl, just like that. You take in that 1 teaspoon of sugar and put it into there. Now the reason you put the sugar in here is as the yeast gets the warm water added to it, it is known as blooming. You want to bloom the yeast. If you do not bloom the yeast, it will ultimately not rise. And again, you need the sugar for the yeast to feed on, because if you do not feed your yeast, it will just take about 10 times longer than it should. And as you can see in here, can you get a nice close look on it? There you go. As you can see here, you're going to take all those chunky pieces, you're going to mix it nicely together. And if there's any clumpy pieces like that, you're going to push it onto the side like that, and you're going to gently mix it in. Do not attempt to whisk this with a whisk because you will break it up too much. As you can see, I'm being quite gentle when it comes to making the yeast on its own. You want to make sure it's nicely mixed through like that. If there are still a few clumps like you see on my spoon over here, that is 100% okay. You put that into the water and you allow that to bloom on itself. This, what we're going to be doing is putting it over here. The oven is on, so the stove is quite warm. So if I put my hand here, it's about, I would say, easy about 30 degrees, maybe a bit more. You take that and you just put it flat onto the counter there. The residue heat should keep it nice and warm. You can tell me what the comments are.
Kids, you sound so sexy. Thanks, Brenda.
And that you're going to allow to raise in temperature and just allow to bloom ultimately. Do not put hot water into this. If you put hot water into this, it will kill the yeast. If you put salt into this, it will kill the yeast. You only want to put lukewarm water into that and sugar. You can substitute the sugar with anything else that's sweet, such as a honey, such as a syrup, anything like that, as long as there's some sweetness that the yeast can actually feed on. Alright. So the next little step is, now that we've got our sugar, our salt and our flour in there, the next step is obviously the corn. And as I said just now, your corn you can always substitute with almost anything you would like to. Inside here is obviously a half a cup of corn. You can put anything other than this, whether it be jalapenos, whether it be chorizo, whether it be herbs, whether it be spring onion, it doesn't really matter, as long as you do not put a liquid bearing item in there. For example, if you take a corn and you squeeze it, note how there's juices and there's stuff left on my fingers. This is a liquid bearing item. So if you look at something like a jalapeno or a chorizo, it will be too moist ultimately. The reason for the corn in this bread is it kind of makes sure that the bread stays nice and moist. But again, you do not need to have it in there. It will still come out quite nice and firm. So the next step is obviously you take your corn, you throw it all in there. I'm just going to stick to the recipe and just do the corn, just like that. And then the next step, which is where the whisk comes in, is a very crucial step. You want this to mix through the whole thing, and this is essentially going to ensure that the salt and the sugar is completely mixed through and completely even, therefore giving you a nice even texture, a nice even taste and flavor. So as you can see, you don't have to go crazy with the whisking or the mixing, and that's it, just over there. Alright, your next step is we put this onto the Kenwood mixer, and I take a sip of my whiskey, thank you, which has some flour in it. That's good. There we go. So now we put it onto our mixture. Note that I have a dough hook. As you can see, do not try to use a whisk or anything else. This is the one you want to do, because this has obviously been designed for bread itself. You put that in. Obviously we make sure that this is ready to go. Now obviously without your water, this is not much is going to be happening to it other than throwing some flour around. That's not going to be very fun. Ultimately we got 350 ml of warm water, lukewarm water. You do not put all of this in one go. You put a majority of it in. Roughly about 50 ml is left over, and then we switch it on. Now initially when you start, you put it on its absolute lowest, and you just make sure everything mixes together. The reason you put it on its lowest to start with is if you switch it on its absolute fullest, flour is going to go everywhere, and you definitely don't want that type of thing to happen. Otherwise, your bread is not going to be made in there, it's going to be made there, it's going to be made there, it's going to be made there. You definitely don't want that to happen. So as you can see, it's starting to come through nicely, starting to clump nicely together. You want to make sure that all the flour along the sides or along the edges are nicely mixed together before you add the rest of it in. Now this, as you can see, is starting to come together, so I can slowly start increasing the speed. But again, just be very careful with it because you don't want flour to be flying all over the place. So we're just going to let this mix through a little bit, and note how it's starting to come together quite nicely. So as you can see, it's still quite dry, so I'm going to add a little bit of extra water that I have just in there, just like that. Now obviously when it comes to making a bread, if it is a little bit too dry in this process, you can always add water. If it's a little bit too wet on this process, you can always add more flour. The nice thing about bread is very, very versatile. You can always add other stuff to it. It's a very hearty type of food that's out there. Although your measurements should be as accurate as you can make them, they can be quite rustic and rough when it comes to measuring, unlike a cake or pastry, which needs to be quite exact. So if you come take a look here, you'll notice that it's starting to clump quite nicely together. And now that it's starting to do, I'm going to turn the speed up just to really start mixing it all together. So I'll leave you with this beautiful working motion for a second, and then we'll continue in a minute.
How do you know when the dough is ready?
So that's actually
from Mika.
Hi Mika. So basically that's actually a good question, because that is where a lot of people struggle when it comes to making sure that the dough is ready, or at least the dough is ready. And that comes down to two things when it comes to feeling and look of the new dough itself. Number one, you want it to be nice and soft. That is a very, very important key. If your dough seems really hard, it's not the bread going to come out very hard. If your dough seems nice and soft and fluffy, it's going to come out nice and soft and fluffy. But ultimately, what we're going to be doing now is, if you can take a look, I'll show you the next little step, because that was only one. So note how everything's now clumped together quite nicely. As you can see, as I feel it, it's a little bit sticky, but it's not sticking to my hands. Hi, Ripey. Alright.
Looks delicious.
It is delicious. Alright, so now we're going to take this off the hook. Sorry, my boy.
Come, out you go.
Alright. So as you can see...
Can you hand mix in the absence of a Kenwood chef?
Definitely you can. Ultimately,
that's from Derek.
Yes, definitely you can. The way you would do it is, you could either do it straight in a bowl, or you could put it straight into a bowl, or mix it straight onto the floor. Ultimately what you want to do is now spread this open nice like that, and then you want to add your yeast mixture to it. Note how it's nicely fluffy. Note how it's gone like almost mousse-like. If you can try to see all those tiny little bubbles that's happening in there, that is how you know that it's been activated, and that is what you're looking for when it comes to yeast. So now you're going to take this mixture, you pour the whole mixture in there, all the liquid that it came with, and we're going to put that back onto the machine and start mixing. Now you put it back in, we close the whole thing up, and we're going to allow that to mix nice and slowly. There we go. Are there any other questions?
The hand mixing, but you've answered that, I think.
Yes, so when it comes to mixing without a Kenwood machine, you can always do this via on your countertop or in a bowl itself. And the next process after this comes out is basically how you would hand mix it. And I'll show you that in the next process. So obviously, because of the yeast I'm going to need to add a little bit more flour, because otherwise it's just going to turn into a slushy slurry, and we definitely do not want that. So we put about a half a cup in there, really get the mixer going nicely. And you can see how everything just kind of comes back together quite nicely, just like that. And again, just put the rest of the spoon in. Alright, so that is ready now. Now we just lift it up. Again, you can see how everything is just stuck to the hook. Now, depending on your counter, depends if you need flour or not. I always recommend you put flour down on the counter. Be careful with the amount that you put into, because if you put too much on your counter, you're going to be adding too much flour to your dough, therefore actually drying it out, and you're going to have the texture that you do not want. So as you can see, this dough is very rough, it's very rustic. Essentially, this is the part that you will, if you're doing it by hand, this is how you would actually do that motion. So first thing you do, you take some flour, spread it out on your counter, spread that nicely, evenly, you don't want any big clumps happening. Then you're going to take your bread, and you're going to gently squish it down initially, just to get that flour onto there. There we go. Alright, So now the motion I'm going to be showing you now, this is another form of kneading. There are many forms of kneading out there. This is one that I find very relaxing, very therapeutic, and you can do this for easy half an hour without really feeling any strain. It's what I like to call the V knead, and that is essentially what you do is you start in the middle with one hand, with the palm of your hand here, you push and you allow the bread to roll, or your hand to push in, as you can see, like that, and you pull it back, and then with the other hand you repeat the motion like that. As you can see, I'm swapping the whole time like that, and I can do this for a very long time, very relaxing. And this is how you also make it by hand. If you don't have a Kenwood mixer, once you've got your dough that's formed like we showed you a second ago, this is what you would do making it by hand. I always recommend making bread by hand. You get to feel the texture, you get to feel the dough, and you can immediately tell if something is wrong, because if the texture is very soft or very hard, you can tell straight away. Where in the machine, as you saw, I just used it to bind it together so that my hands don't look crazy like breadsticks basically, and you don't want that. And then you could do this, you want to do this from anywhere from between 5 to 10 minutes. That's what you're aiming for. And as you can see, I'm literally just going side to side using this. As you can see, it's very relaxing, it's not hard on the shoulders. Anyone could do this, even kids could do this. So once you've done this for about 5 minutes, you're obviously going to take your bread, you're going to roll it. And what you're looking for when it comes to kneading is if you pull your bread and you pull it like this, you can see there's a nice soft texture to it like that. If you push it, or do that, if you push it, you'll notice the springiness that happens. As you push it in, it springs back like that. That's what you're looking for when it comes to the bread. Ultimately, as you push it down, you're going to roll this up into a nice ball. The way I do that is I'm literally squeezing it. So as you can see how my hands are, I'm squeezing it and folding it down. And once it's down, I'm tucking it in like that. Like that. Once that's nicely in a nice ball, like we got there, you want to start flattening it and squishing it together. Now, what we're actually doing is making this a little bit longer than what it should be, without using any rolling pins. So once that's there, you can see the rustic shape of it. You do not need to put this into a bread tin if you do not want to. You could put this straight into a tray and bake it straight away. However, we are obviously going to be putting it into a bread tin. You can use any size tin you would like to. You can use any size tray you would like to. As you can see, the bread needs to be able to fit into the tin without any problems, without forcing it in. What you want to do is make sure that you spray and cook the tin. Do not use any butter. Do not use any oil, because what that will do is that will actually soak into the bread itself, making the bread a little bit on the oilier side, which you don't really want. What you want to do is when you take your spray and cook, you want to be quite generous with it, especially along the sides and the corners of the bread or of the tin. So as you can see, a nice good spray in the corners, like that. As you can see, nicely coated. Then I'm going to be doing the center and then the sides. Now note it does seem a little bit on the excess amount when it comes to spray and cook, but the last thing you want is for your beautiful bread to essentially stick to the side, and once you pull it out, you've got a big hole in the side, and that's not what you want. So now we've got our bread nicely over here.
Billy Baker says, I reckon you may be known as the shoeless chef after this.
You can see my feet. Fantastic. Yes. So ultimately, as you can see, you put that into your bread tin like that, and again you find a warm spot. Now this is a very important key, a warm spot to allow your bread to rise. You take a cloth like this one over here. I'll take another one here. You take a cloth, and ultimately you want to put your cloth, a very lightly damped cloth, and put that over it like that. And again you put it into a warm space like that and allow it to rise. Alright, so now through the magic of preparedness, since we are in lockdown and you have to pre-prepare everything, get ready, I'm going to go kasham, and voila.
Whatever, you were just bored earlier, so you made it.
And this is what the bread should look like once it's proved. As you can see, it's much higher than what it is. If I actually feel it, you'll note that the whole thing is moving. It's very soft and very gentle. Do not knock this down. Do not bump it on the side. Do not drop it down. That will knock the whole bread down and make it completely flat, and you definitely do not want that to happen. The next thing is, once it looks like this, as you can see, it's easily doubled in size. You're going to be taking this bread as is and sticking it straight into the oven. And depending on the size of the bread, so obviously, like I said, you could take this and you could divide them into smaller rolls to make little rolls or buns. You could divide them into little baguettes, like making little mini hot dog rolls. You could also bake them like how we've done that, or make them quite rustic as well. What you can do from that point is, depending on the size of it when it comes to baking, you want to cook them anywhere from 50 minutes from your really small rolls, to like your slider rolls, to like a nice big baguette loaf, which will take about an hour. So anywhere from 50 minutes to an hour, depending on the size. Now when it comes to actually checking the bread, now this is where a lot of people will struggle with, because how do you check the bread? A lot of people will say, let's listen for that hollowness. That's not what you're wanting to do, because that takes a bit of a skill to do, and you don't want to have to worry about a skill when it comes to making a bread. For me, the quickest, easiest way to check if a bread is done is by using the metal skewer we spoke about earlier. You could either use a metal skewer, or where's my knife gone? Oh, my knife was here. Or you can use a small knife. Make sure that your blade is nice and small. And the way you do it is you stick the smallest bit of whatever the knife or the skewer is into the middle or the thickest part of the bread. You let it sit there for 5 seconds, and then you put it on this part of your hand over here. You literally just put it like that. If you can keep this on your hand, it is not cooked. If you have to pull your hand away because it stings, it is cooked. It's the quickest, easiest way. It doesn't mark your hand, it doesn't hurt, it's like a little sting. I find it's the best way to do it. So now obviously this size bread will cook for about anywhere from 20 minutes to a half an hour. Ultimately, obviously we're not going to be recording for that long, so what I've done is I've pre-made it. And then this over here is what the bread should look like once it's done. As you can see, it's got a beautiful color on it. If I squeeze, you'll notice how nice and soft it is. Really, really soft. You notice how it's got a beautiful color around the sides, at the bottom. When it's finished baking, you want to take it out. You want to put it on a rack. You want to cool it down as quickly as you can. Do not put it in a fridge. Do not put it where there's a cold air going over it. Just
so not on a windowsill.
Not on a windowsill. Allow it to be lifted off whatever you put it on. So a rack, a cooling rack. Because if you leave it either in the tin, or if you leave it on a board like this, it will sweat and go soggy. And no one likes a soggy bread. Maybe you do, I don't. Right. And that is how you make an Umbhako Xhosa bread. And yes, thank you very much.
I want a piece now.
You want a piece? Oh yes, let me cut it. Let me use that one. Alright, so come take a closer look and I'll show you what the inside looks like. As you can see how nice and soft it is. You can see the inside there. You can see the beautiful color that's going on there. You take a little bit of this awesome soft butter, spread that across there, and there you go. There is your bread. Alright, and thank you very much, and I will see you again next time.